I joke to some degree, but I'm also not 100% joking either, is being the final stage of my HIV project is to have the vaccine be transmitted by semen.
Well, that's a bonus.
Right?
I can see why that would be a plus.
Yeah, that'd be very effective. But then what if you can start doing other things besides just vaccination, besides immunization, start having other benefits? What if you could use semen to do this follistatin thing, right?
That would make you very popular in certain communities.
Right, and yeah, and it would spread naturally in the right place if for the HIV treatment.
Welcome to the Furrowed Brow with Jeffrey Kipler. Cool. You ready to get this started here, Tristan?
I think I'm set.
All right, let's do it, man. So, welcome to the Furrowed Brow. I am honored to have Tristan Roberts here. He is deeply involved in the biohacking community, going so far as to inject himself with experimental therapeutics developed outside the federal regulatory framework. He's a deep thinker in the space of DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, and how they intersect with legal frameworks, along with decentralized science, the DeSci movement, and has another number of other areas of interest that we're going to touch on. Welcome, Tristan.
Thanks, Jeff. I'd say I'm honored to be here, but I don't know if that's going to get me canceled 10 years down the road. So I'll just say that, yeah, I'm happy to talk with you on these topics.
Cool. We don't have to fake any honor here at all. So Tristan was featured in a couple of documentary type things, Citizen Bio, an Unnatural Selection, where they talk about his journey with Ascendance Biomedical and experimenting with a cure for HIV. Could you share your story and just give the listeners an overview of that tidbit of your life?
Sure. This was back around 2018, and I wasn't particularly into biohacking myself, but through some connections to crypto anarchists who were associated with biohackers, I was given the opportunity to test out an experimental treatment from some people who knew that I had HIV and knew that I had more of a risk tolerance than most people. I was soon confronted with the reality that even if this therapy worked, A, nobody would believe me, and B, it would be almost impossible to get it to people in large amounts without it potentially being pirated or being attacked by the FDA or what have you. So towards the first goal, I recognize that the sad reality of epistemology right now is that if people see that it's on TV, they will believe that it's true. So I knew that even if we didn't get FDA approval down the road, if I was able to generate a narrative that people saw on Netflix or what have you, then at least some people would believe me if I said that the treatment worked. The first treatment did not seem to do anything. It was nice to show that it wasn't, inherently dangerous. That was something, right?
It's always a good first step.
Yes. And then after that, we were going to keep refining it and modifying. We were using a plasmid as the basis of this gene modification, which there was a lot of research for this back in the 70s and 80s, and then it just seemed to have died off. But in around 2010, some researchers were able to figure out something that actually made it a viable gene therapy. Yeah. The problem with back in decades ago was that it worked for a few days. You could make it produce something that you encoded into the plasmid, but the immune system would recognize this as some sort of foreign bacteria DNA, and then it would remove the cells that were producing the plasmid or producing the target of the plasmid. But around 2010, some researchers figured out how to make a plasmid construct that doesn't have any of these bacterial components that trigger the immune system. And then it seems like it's able to keep producing the target protein for weeks or months at a time. Strangely enough, and there's competing theories on this, there hasn't been a lot of commercialization since then of plasmids, but the group that I've been associated with, they've kept developing it, they've kept running with it. And we're currently in a phase 1 study, not for HIV, but for a different target. And it seems like it's working, and it seems like it works for a few months. So I like to describe it as sort of being a henna tattoo of gene therapy, right?
Okay. So so the
Yeah, go
plasma
ahead.
therapy is like you're injecting it in an isolated site, and the plasma itself is affecting a number of cells around the injection site. Am I characterizing that correctly?
Yes, so far we've only been doing it in a localized area. We haven't been mainlining it into the arteries.
Okay.
And it seems like it stays wherever that injection site is. You have to combine the plasmid with something that enables it to enter into the cells.
Yep.
And we've started off with fat tissue just because we knew that if things went badly, we could at least go get cool sculpting and just destroy those cells, and that would be like the undo button.
So wait a minute,
But
what is this new therapy trying to do? Like so you've moved on from the HIV thing. What else are you working on?
the HIV project is still in development.
Okay.
What has gotten me is I need a primary investigator, and this is infuriating as a biohacker that now I need to have some sort of MD sign off on this project that I've been working on for years, but I'm trying to do it by the book, and do it legally. So
Okay.
I'm talking to one tomorrow. I'm pretty optimistic that it is going to go forward next year. But we'll come back to that later, maybe. Right now, what is being approved, what is being actively recruited and researched is the same plasmid. It's like a cassette, right? You can load a different DNA sequence into this cassette.
Mm-hmm.
The target is follistatin,
Okay.
which is a naturally occurring protein. And there's already a gray market for people to just sort of straight up inject follistatin into their body. And the reason is because you have similar effects to anabolic steroids, but it seems like all of the side effects are good instead of bad.
Interesting. Okay, so it's muscle growth sort of thing.
It's the mechanism of action isn't that it's causing you to produce more muscle, it's that it's slowing down the rate at which you break down your muscle tissue. Because we're
I see.
always building it up and breaking it down, building it
Yeah,
up,
yeah,
breaking
yeah.
it down. It's just like, just slow that down a little bit. And it seems like it has effects with helping out diabetes, helping out bone density, and maybe even some slight longevity effects. But the problem with the current model of just injecting it is that the half-life is only like 2 days. So you have to like
Okay.
keep injecting it. And most people are not comfortable with doing injections every, 3 or 4 days. So it's just not practical for most people. But if you have a plasmid that's going to last for 6 to 12 months and will keep producing it, then that's exactly what you might want to try out.
And does it permanently alter the cells that are injected, like you affect?
So yes, the cells that are transfected is the term,
Okay.
will always have this sort of extra chromosome. I like to describe it as rather than changing the content on your hard drive on your chromosomes, it's like plugging in a USB stick,
Yeah, yeah,
a
yeah.
miniature
My,
chromosome. But those cells naturally die off every year approximately. So
I
there's
see.
kind
So
of
they don't multiply and propagate
you
themselves.
know, my understanding was that these modified chromosomes do not propagate, but I'm actually not 100% sure on
Okay.
that, Andy. But it seems like it naturally fades away over the course of a year.
Gotcha. Interesting. And how are you measuring that? How do you know the time frame of like basically a year?
So I haven't done the follistatin therapy myself yet
Mhm.
personally, but these other co-founders, they have been, and we've been measuring for follistatin levels in the blood.
I see. Okay.
Yes, but I mean, also we've been measuring body composition with DEXA scans and bone density through DEXA scans, and those three things are our main sort of endpoints for the phase 1 study that's going on right now. And um, problem with getting into the US is like, well, what do you approve it for, right? Like the FDA doesn't do augmentation.
Right.
So it might be for frailty for older people, it might be for bone density. Getting a gene therapy approved for obesity is probably not going to happen, right? They'd be like,
Right. But you only have to get, as far as I don't know that much about this, but I think if you get it approved for one thing, then doctors can prescribe it for other things, right?
Yes. So I think we might end up going after muscle wasting diseases because it
I
will
see.
help slow down that rate of them losing their muscle. And then, yeah, perhaps people will be able to prescribe it for other uses as well.
So it sounds like I have a buddy, Ed Clay and Scotty Nelson, who run this hospital, Chipsa, down in Tijuana. And they, like, I've talked to them, and it's like they're doing some things down there that, you can't get done in the United States, like cellular therapies and whatnot. And it's like they're doing jurisdictional arbitrage in some way. And it sounds like you're doing something very similar.
Yes, the company Minicircle has been working out of a special economic zone called Prospera.
Okay.
I describe this as a libertarian's wet dream. The basic premise of Prospera is that if you can get insurance to cover it, you can do it. That's the regulatory model. So, I mean, there's other parts to it, but we found a partnering clinic down there that already does stem cell treatments legally in Honduras. And they've recently annexed their lab into this special economic zone. And I mean, when I first went down there, it was like a co-working space on the beach that is its own country, practically, right? Like the criminal laws are the same as Honduras, but
Sure.
all the regulatory stuff is different. And when you get in there, I mean, there's like an armed guard, right? And like a little gate that opens and closes. But then once you like get past that, you have to sign in and you're acknowledging that you're in a different jurisdiction now. And if you have any disputes, you have to go through our court system, which is apparently just like administered by some judges in Arizona or something, right? It's just this totally wacky place. And I have mixed feelings about it. Like, I think there's a lot of potential to do good, but I can also see the counter arguments as well, that this is just gonna like be a tax haven and take away money from the island and that could have been going to development other things. But at the end of the day, it's like it comes down to like, do you believe the existing systems are legitimate and worthwhile? And the answer is for me personally, like, no, not at all. So hopefully it's a good stepping stone. There's other companies that are trying to just sort of prove the concept in a space where you're not having to spend millions of dollars on lawyers in order to like grease the wheels with the regulators. And so that's exactly what we've been doing. We've been doing a phase 1 study. It was IRB approved, as far as I understand.
What's IRB?
An institutional review board.
Okay.
Which there's a whole history of it, but it's pretty much a way for everyone to wash their hands of the karma of what they're doing in a way that nobody's actually liable. It is infuriating to some degree because the pharmaceutical companies just have IRBs that just approve their studies that don't actually provide any meaningful feedback. And then these IRBs are saying, yes, this is a good idea, or no, this is a bad idea. But at the end of the day, nobody's liable. Like, no one actually is caught holding the bag. And so what it ends up being is that there's just this huge amount of bureaucratic bullshit in the way of getting any study done.
And is
money.
this US law or is this Honduras? Like,
most countries have adopted it. It started in the United States. There was like a reasonable, I think it was born out of the syphilis experiments and realizing, like, did nobody say anything about this? Like, shouldn't we have someone like looking over what's going on? And so, there's legitimate, reason for it, but it hasn't evolved.
And the syphilis ones, I forget the name of it. It's like they infected a bunch of black people, like in the South, right? They gave them syphilis to like study the Tuskegee. Thank you. The Tuskegee experiments. Yeah. So it was supposed to like prevent something like that, but it ended up becoming like a rubber stamp for like invested entities to like be in the clear.
Yeah, and it wasn't even that. I don't think they infected them on purpose. It's that they, during the course of the experiment of the study,
Yeah.
a treatment for syphilis came out, and they're like, "Don't give it to them. We want to see what happens when it gets really bad." That was what was going on there. So
Oh,
yeah, like not great situation, and the the current system though is not any better. So that's something, a big topic we can kind of dive into, is
well,
something called,
tell me.
yeah.
Let's get into that. Like, what do you think? Because you've been really at the cutting edge of this, what we can do, what we can't do, pushing the boundaries, and you must have seen like, hey, the regulations do something good sometimes, or am I putting words in your mouth?
Clearly we need some ways of preventing bad actors from just shilling whatever the fuck they can and getting
Yeah.
away with it, right? And but right now there's just giant holes in the system, and I think like a lot of things just aren't regulated, like supplements, nootropics,
Yep.
longevity claims. But the other side of it is just there's so many treatments that could have been, that never went anywhere. And some of it is just coordination issues, failures, the co-founders hating each other, or the worst is when the pharmaceutical companies just like buy it out and then cancel it. But in the middle, there's these cases of regulatory. There's just too much of a burden to get through the regulatory hoops, and then it never ends up happening. There's a vaccine for cavities that
Okay.
never ended up happening. There's another biohacker developed an oral treatment that modified his gut bacteria to produce lactase so that he wouldn't be lactose intolerant. And it worked for a year. And he like put out the instructions to how to do it on YouTube, but he never was able to commercialize it, never really cared to commercialize it. And now it's like, there's just so many things. There's so much innovation out there that just goes nowhere. And it's hard for us to think about this. This is a logical problem with humans. We're so much more able to focus on the cases of something bad got approved and these bad things happened. But we
Yeah.
can't think
Yeah.
about all of these good things that could have happened that got blocked because we can't point to them. We can't really
Right.
like say, oh, we would have been able to cure this, right? It's hard to do counterfactuals.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's very hard to prove the thing that didn't happen, right? Like, you can make a case for it, but like, you know, you can definitely say somebody got a lot of bad cases of syphilis.
Yes, or whatever side effects from the thalidomide or what have you. So there's good reasons, but what I've seen in the US is that if you don't have a very expensive lawyer to sort of take your documents to the regulators,
Yeah.
then they don't think you're serious. They don't respect you. They're not going to prioritize you. You're just going to go in the back of a stack, and it's going to take forever, if at all, that you're going to get anything approved. So there's this sort of corruption involved where you have to pay these lawyers who then are like taking out these regulators to dinner or giving them
Yeah.
whatever kind of side benefits.
Well, it's
And
the
if you don't,
jobs afterwards. There's it's the regulatory to industry pipeline that is like really become incredibly infectious in all over the United States government.
yes. So it's all about favors, and the reality is that is part of the driver for why there's this valley of death, they call it, in
Yeah.
innovation for pharmaceutical compounds, where it's only like 1 in 100 of new innovative products ever make it to market. And there's lots of reasons why it dies from there to getting to market, but a large chunk of it is just institutionalized corruption in the United States, I'd say.
Is there any sort of resource that's out there that like lists these things that you're talking to? Does anybody maintain a wiki of this stuff? And like, so some 18, 20 something year old can come along and say, like, I want to pick up the flag. These are the flags that have been dropped. I want to carry this one.
I don't think it's as effective to point out what's wrong with the existing system so much as
Yeah.
to just start building the new systems that
I s-
go over like a bridge over the valley of death. And so that's why I'm ultimately very optimistic about decentralized science providing
Mhm.
ways of, first identifying and legitimizing new treatments, but then also somehow getting them to market with or without regulatory approval. And that's the beautiful thing about crypto is that in theory, you can have this entire ecosystem, an entire marketplace without having to ask people's permission to make it.
Right, right. So, like, how are you guys for your what do you call it? The independent, the Honduras
This is Prospera is the special economic
Prospera,
zone.
the special administrative zone. Um, are you guys using crypto to fund everything, to do the transactions? Like, how to? I mean, you don't get into anything you don't want people knowing about, but
We were renting an office there, and but they CEO like made them take USDC for payment because it was like, come on, guys, you're gonna be this edgy zone and not take crypto. But ultimately, right now, nothing is required for crypto in the special economic zone. I've been talking to Mike Sin from the Cure DAO, and he and I are interested in possibly creating a sort of alternative to the FDA that's based there. That's one of the beautiful things about Prospera is that if you have a regulatory system that has been approved someplace else, or even one that hasn't been approved someplace else, you can put it to the council and they can vote to whether or not to accept it. And if it passes, then that's law for the case of your company
okay.
in that jurisdiction. And so there's a banker right there now who took a proposed banking regulatory system from someone from the Bank of England. It never got approved, but he really liked it, and he used that as the basis for this sort of his own banking system. And so he got approved from Prospera, and I think the harder part is to now get acceptance from Swift, right?
Yeah,
Those are the people that really matter at the end of the day. Is can you connect to the other banks or not, right?
right,
But
right.
it sounds like he's making progress, and it's exciting to maybe apply that to uh, biomedical concepts and prove that it is possible to have a system that is faster, more responsive, yet still accountable at the end of the day to just get things rolling down there. And so it seems like there's a good chance if this economic zone survives the next 10 or 20 years, that it will become a huge hotspot for medical tourism. Uh, there already was this stem cell clinic operating down there, mostly injecting exosomes, which I guess are like harvested from the placenta during some births, and then they kind of like multiply them, and then they can inject them into sites that need regeneration. And so it was a lot of athletes and aging people
Yep.
flying down from the United States and Canada to visit this clinic down there.
That's what
But
Chipsa does. Some of that they regrew. I saw some Instagram posts about somebody regrew a thumb.
I have not seen entire body parts being regrown, but it's infuriating to see that it seems like it's working, and then like why is this not available in the United States, right? Like what at the end of the day, what is going on? And it's just the people who are already making a ton of money in the existing system don't want anything to be changed.
Right,
That's
right.
the reality of it.
So what if you were in this special economic zone, like coming up with what you think would be the best variants? Because clearly, like you support some sort of regulation. You support that there needs to be somebody who's saying people aren't going to be injected with, if you're getting injected with paint thinner, right? Like, somebody's going out after you, right? Um, what do you think what are the differences that you would like to see happen in this small scale incubation area?
I think part of it, there needs to be more of a gradient of risk tolerance. Some people are
Mm-hmm.
okay with doing it when nobody's done it, or when 5 people have done it, or 500 people have done it. And so having a more high resolution system for not just it's been approved or not approved, that needs to happen. There needs to be a separation between safety and efficacy.
Mm-hmm.
Right that has been part of the problem with the FDA, is that they used to just be safety and then they moved on to efficacy, but efficacy is such a depends on the situation. And then it kind of pigeonholes you into one certain use case, and so that I think is also problematic. And then lastly, I would say that there needs to be data collection that's going on in perpetuity, rather than just like, well, we did a 6-month study and nobody died, great. But it's like, well, maybe there's side effects 10 years down the road when you're doing this for a decade long. And right now, nobody knows those are happening. Nobody wants to know that they're happening because it's not profitable. So like, what's the situation? So I'm optimistic that as the Web3 ecosystem matures, that we'll be able to have a more transparent reporting system where you will have people who are sort of verified recipients, whether they're test subjects or consumers, it doesn't matter. What's important is that you know that they actually received the treatment, you know that they're not a sock puppet, and then over time, they can submit their data about their health, their outcomes, and then people can make informed decisions, or more realistically, people's algorithms, their bots can make decisions for them about whether or not this is safe or trustworthy and worth pursuing.
Gotcha. So a little bit more of an expectation, like more risk tolerance to allow people to say, yeah, let's go, I'm adventurous, and a more of a long-term look into the data sets that are being collected is kind of what you're aiming at.
Yeah, I think this is one of the places where decentralized science is going to shine, is just being able to aggregate health data across many different conditions, many different people, many decades, in a way that is just not possible in the double-blind, randomized, placebo study. Like that paradigm was useful to a degree, but it's aging and it needs to be updated. And I mean, so like for instance, this last experiment that it's still in the process of this follistatin. We've done 25 people or so far, and I was just taken away by the conversations I overheard, like in the car to the clinic, because these are all people who are like longevity and health like experts. Like they're at the top. They're spending, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars on treatments. And just having them compare notes about what they liked and what was working and whatnot was like very informative. But from a 20th century scientist perspective, that's fucking awful, because these people like are so hard to like, how do you know which of those worked, right? If you live to be 130 and you did 20 different treatments, which of them did it, right? Like, and there's no answer to that. Like there's longevity does not fit into the existing model. And so there has to be some way of moving past that aggregates all of these different studies, and then you can use the correct algorithms to reverse engineer and see which of those actually were the most effective, especially, I mean, which of those combined perhaps were the most effective. And then
that's a very complicated problem, I imagine. That seems like a combinatorial nightmare right there.
Yes,
in terms of figuring out way above my pay grade.
Have their work cut out for them, but the first step is just getting all the data together and monetizing it in a way that there's a reason to be not just producing data, but producing quality data. And so I'm optimistic. What I really want to work on eventually is a cooperative that, you have the chance to put your data in. And there's this assumption that like the things that work out well, we're going to go do big buy orders for it and secure access to it for many years. And then you're in a position where it's like, if someone's faking their data, you're potentially screwing over everybody in that group, right?
I mean, that was certainly running through my head. Like, I mean, it's garbage in, garbage out, right? Like, and we're going to get into regenerative finance at some point in this conversation. And that's where the alarm bells go off for me in that area, is like because one of my personal ways that I try to view everything is that if something is value enough and the surface area is large enough, there is an attack vector that exists will be exploited.
Yes. So in this case, it's like you don't want someone with a mediocre longevity treatment filling that data pool with data that says this is a really good longevity treatment. it's wasting people's time and money pursuing it. So there has to be the right incentives in place to prevent those sort of bad actors. And I think it's only when you have skin in the game, when it's like, these are the things that we're taking ourselves,
Yes.
that people will create enough of a barrier against those bad actors.
And that was exactly what impressed me about you so much, is you put the skin in the game, right? Like when somebody is actually going out and saying, I am going to take the risk, I'm going to report back on how that I feel. And also, like, you have a personal connection with that person where they're not trying to manipulate some market. You're telling them, as my credibility is on the line with you. Like, I don't know how you scale that exactly, but that's much more meaningful to me than a bunch of aggregated data you don't know the sources from.
Yes, I feel you on all of that, and that's the first one not working out. At least hopefully people will believe me when I say that it finally did work out, right? And that instead of
Yeah,
I'm not
I
just
mean,
killing something.
what I imagine it would be like, a more realistic sort of thing is like, or a realistic sort of thing in my mind is like, you have the credibility. Gosh, I had HIV. Now I don't. I go through these battery of tests or whatever. I don't know if you're always going to have the conspiracy theorists that say you never had it in the first place, but
Oh,
that's coming. I'm sure.
yeah, I mean, I'm
Um,
down to talk about that because I've recently dived really deep into that subject because before I've been in the process of running this, organizing a clinical study for HIV treatments, and I wanted to be 100% certain that it is not bullshit or fabricated or some sort of epistemic fraud that's been
yeah,
perpetrated on humanity. And so I read Peter Duesberg's book, who was like the main sort of critic of HIV equals AIDS in the 80s and 90s. And then Robert Kennedy's more recent book, The Real Anthony Fauci.
I love Robert K. I haven't read that one, but we've got it on the bookshelf down here.
It I thought I was already black-pilled about the existing system, but then I read that book and I'm
Oh,
like, oh my gosh, it's
it's
even worse
way
than I
worse.
thought.
Yeah.
Oh,
Robert Kennedy does great work.
yeah, and it's so well documented, and he does, and supposedly it's about COVID, right? I talked to people who are
Yeah.
interested in Fauci and COVID, but he spends almost a half of the book about HIV and whether HIV, how it was engineered to some degree, not literally, but like the response to it, I guess,
Oh,
right?
sure.
Yeah, I
Well,
mean,
Fauci's greatest gift is a bureaucratic image message crafter. It's not as a scientist. It's him being able to, from what I can tell, him being able to corral scientists and bend them to their will to have the effect on policy and the media that he wants, and he's damn good at it.
yes. This the start of cancel culture, right? It was like anyone who goes against us will lose all their funding, will not be able to publish in journals anymore. It very vindicative, like
Yeah.
very just but
I
so
mean, you Amy Maxman and Nature is that journalist, and now she's, yeah. I don't know if you know about this one, but she was like the pop science writer for Nature, and like, you know was writing all of these articles about how these, the people who said it came from the lab in Wuhan were conspiracy theorists, and it's the zoonosis is obviously correct, and like now she's got an internship at the Council of Foreign Relations. Uh,
and so when you think if the entire NIH, NIAID is taken by that sort of corruption, even if the scientists in the mid-level and the lower levels think that they're doing is right, if the people at the top levels have been corrupted, it ultimately doesn't matter.
Yeah. It's like Noam Chomsky's manufacturing consent at just like a way grander scale. Like Chomsky was just scratching the surface of what was going on.
So the basic premise of the Kennedy book is that they ran out of viruses to fight in the 70s. They tried to manufacture one with the swine
Yeah.
flu. They ended up immunizing hundreds of thousands of people. No one ended up catching the swine flu. Hundreds of people had really bad side effects, maybe dozens died. And then Fauci's boss eventually got axed because of that. And then he came to power in the early 80s, and he saw HIV as a chance to just manufacture fear and shore up power, right? I guess to some degree, to surround himself with these PIs that are essentially his cavalry, and he's like the lord, the general to some degree. And so ultimately, I'm of the opinion that like HIV is real, and it does lead to destroying immune systems. But I think what the tragedy, there's two tragedies that Fauci did perpetrate, and that one of them was ignoring all the other cases that didn't fit with that paradigm. There are people who have HIV who don't progress to AIDS, and that was just kind of ignored. They're like, well, those people, they're going to eventually have AIDS, and we're just not going to really focus on them, when they should have been trying to figure out what was happening with those people. And then there's people whose immune systems are trashed, and they have AIDS according to the definition of their CD4 count, and those people are kind of marginalized. They gave them some sort of idiopathic lymphocytopenia, they just didn't want people investigating it, essentially, and they swept it under the rug. And what reality was that a lot of people, it probably doing drugs, especially poppers and meth and all these things, was probably accelerating the progression of HIV to AIDS. And if people knew that, and it was more studied, I think it would have helped a lot of people not progress to AIDS. And then the second really big tragedy of everything was just how much AZT accelerated the decline in people. If you had just been pushing,
what is
be
AZT?
Healthy, don't do drugs, instead of AZT, the outcomes probably would have been a lot better, from what I've read. And the same thing is probably true with COVID, right? Where it's like remdesivir is not really helping. If we had a system that promoted healthy living and vitamins and sunlight and all of these things that you can't make a profit off of, people would have been a lot better off. But if you can't put a patent on it, they just don't care. And that's the sad reality of the current medical system.
It's phenomenal, like that we talk about how health outcomes in the United States, and that 90% of the ailments that people deal with are lifestyle issues. Like it's, you're eating too much, you're not exercising enough, you're abusing drugs or alcohol, you're far too sedentary. Like it's just,
so again, there has to be some sort of incentives. You can't just make them get off the couch. There has to be well, your insurance is going to be a lot higher if you don't actively move or whatever. And I think we're starting to see that, but I'm worried that it's going to be more of the dystopian side of it, where it's like, oh, your Fitbit wasn't moving enough, and now you're going to lose your health insurance, rather than it being sort of a scaling gradient or what have you. But
I mean, and the medical system is set up on a fee-for-service basis. So the more medicine you get, the more the doctors in the hospital makes. And they didn't design the system, but you throw an MBA in there who's trying to optimize, and trying to help them get them out of the red for the quarter. What's going to happen.
Well, just having all that med school debt has ensured that they're going to have to be complicit in that system for the next decade at least. So yeah.
I used to work for a company that did medical billing at scale, and I was part of their technology group, and doing product management. And every once in a while we would talk about the system and the nature of the outcomes of those things, so we could understand the nature of the beast that we're dealing with. And one of the cases that got brought up, and I'm not sure if it was Maine or Vermont, but for whatever reason, the combination of the CPT code, the procedure code, and the regional code made hysterectomies this incredibly profitable thing. And you had this county or two or three where there was just this explosion of women getting hysterectomies. It was directly, it was directly causal. I don't know if they moved there to do it or they just figured something out, but all of a sudden diagnoses led to a lot of hysterectomies.
Yeah, the C-sections also is like happening way more than they probably need to be, but it's
Mhm.
just more lucrative to do that than a standard birth. So like, yeah, why not? It's yeah, I there's so much that has to be done to fix that system and to how to go back. I don't know without a full revolution, but
Yeah, dude, I don't think that these things, one, I don't think that a revolution works. I used to think that that might be a thing. I mean, it's just waiting for the system to collapse in and on itself, in my personal estimation.
yes, that's the conclusion I reached to was eventually we have to build the systems to fill in the power vacuum that happens when that
That's
collapse does happen, so that
Yes, yes, my friend, yes.
uh,
Have some credibility for when the system collapses left to help rebuild it.
I think part of that why it's hanging on is twofold. Is that the boomers think that A, they paid into Social Security and they're waiting to get the payout, and they earned it. It's their money, and B, they think that if uh the medical system, if Medicare collapsed, they would literally die. So there's this sort of like cognitive magical power where they're just like, we need the government or else we will literally die. And that's what I'm really hoping that if we have this sort of alternative health system that is able to provide better outcomes for cheaper, then we can ease away from that sort of thing that's getting everyone stuck on the old paradigm and it's propping it up even as it gets more and more cancerous.
You actually reminded me of a story, like, of how I went from, like, I used to think, you needed government health care, there was some merit to, like, socially supported healthcare. And here's what got me off of that horse. I was in Hawaii, and I was hanging out with there's this local guy named Bird, and Bird was, I don't know, in his late 60s, 70s, something like that. And he and I used to smoke a little weed together and have a cigarette and have a beer and, talk about this and that. And he was telling me about all of his health problems. Now you look at Bird and he is not in good health. Like, he is just looks like he's, one trip over a line on the street and he's gonna lose it. And he's had like a couple of bypasses and this or that, and he's like, oh well, my doctor tells me I need to stop drinking and smoking, but I'm not gonna change at my age. And he's living in like government housing. All of his bills are, essentially paid for. Like, all of his health care is paid for, and he's just like, nah, fuck it. This is how I'm going out. And I'm like, I like you, Bird, but I don't think anybody should be footing the bill for you.
Yeah, again, the incentive structure. Uh, I first got into crypto through basic income activism because in my
Ah,
mind, that was the only way to transition from our existing shitty system into something that was less shitty, was we have to
yeah.
have an intermediary step. But eventually I realized like it's just gonna make people stuck on a corrupt system. They're never gonna want it to go away. They're gonna think that that's their money and they need it. And so then the elites will just be able to get away with more and more shit because no one's gonna push over the money
Yeah.
factory.
Oh yeah, UBI. I think the entire concept is hilarious. Like, I just can't, like, again, I'm living in Hawaii, and it's like the first of the month, and I'm not living in a rich section. I'm living with the salt of the earth people, and there's a lot of people on food stamps and government help. And the first of the month would come around, and that's when all the crazies would come out at night, like, because they trade their food stamps for the drugs. And it would
Mm,
be like the first weekend of the month was party time. And it's just like
hmm.
people, wolves howling at the moon in the streets, really. So it's, the experience itself really made me go, whoa, this is, because I had never really been around folks who were on that kind of government assistance,
Mm.
in such large numbers. And it was phenomenal to me how the mechanisms worked.
If they're printing the money anyways, why not give it to the people? But yeah, ultimately the system is just
And I
just
don't fault anybody from taking it. Like, if the government's giving out free money, if they offer me, I will take it. But I don't know about the long-term consequences of becoming dependent on it. That seems really bad.
Yep, precisely.
Man, it's like, if you ever asked like somebody who's a hardcore communist what they're gonna do after the revolution, it's always like the say, I'm gonna be an artist. Nobody's gonna say like, I'm gonna change people's oil. Nobody's like, you know what I want to do? I want to install roofs.
Oh, yeah. I mean, to some degree, the pressure could lead to automating most of the shit jobs, but it's gonna take some work to get there for sure. And yeah, the sudden change is what's gonna happen, right? There's just gonna be the same group of people taking power and not gonna lead to great outcomes. So
Well, it's like, I've gotten to the point where I'm like, I don't mind. I think oligarchy is a very natural state of being. I don't think it's too overly avoidable. I just would rather the oligarchs acting a little bit differently and having, making better choices with their power.
hmm. How do you hold them accountable though?
That's a great question. That is the $1 million question right there.
Musk is fucking around, and I think he's gonna find out that if you piss off enough people at the New York Times, like they
Oh,
will find something, right?
oh
He's
yeah.
like,
Yeah, yeah. They're going after Musk, and we can pivot a little bit to SBF, because this seems like Musk is this terrible, terrible man, and SBF just had a puff piece written about him in the New York Times, like, well, it's too
he
bad that didn't work out. Oops.
he made a few bad trades. Come on.
He was trying to do the most good he could.
Yeah. So, oh, where to begin with that, right? Because I think there is kind of a jockeying of power between the oligarchs, and I don't think either side is particularly in looking out for humanity's best interests. I would say they might talk in a way that makes them sound like they are, but I would not be first to go on the ships to Mars personally. I think that's a good chance to end up as a slave in the mines of Mars personally. But
I
uh,
think you're a very smart man, Tristan. Yeah. When I hear like people was like, yeah, I'd go to Mars, I'm like, you realize your entire evolution has programmed you to want things that are on this earth that do not exist on Mars.
no one's coming to save you either from the
No,
mines.
no, it's
That's
a
the
one-way
thing.
trip.
Yeah. But so SBF was funding all this effective altruism, and then I
So
had a
what's your
friend.
take on effective altruism?
Yes.
Yeah.
I had a friend who was applying for grants for effective altruism, and he was trying to become a professional furry. It was from a transhumanist perspective. He wanted to be promoting transhumanism through, I guess, VR and furrydom, and so he
This is
was
the
applying for a
commies. This is
grant.
what they do after the revolution. They
This is
become a
exactly.
professional furry.
So he was trying to get a grant from the FTX Effective Altruism Grants Agency, and he was telling me that like these are the people who are funding the moonshots. If you can't get approved money from the regular effective altruists, this group they might give you money. And now you see, well, that's a reason why. It's like from the top of the organization, they're just betting on whatever the fuck, not best ideas, and so it kind of trickles down into the entire industry, but. I think
This is,
effective altruism is they're almost always starting off with assumptions that are just incorrect. And because of that, you multiply it in a way that leads to really bad outcomes. And let's say one example is this idea that we got to think about the trillions of humans in the future that might exist at some point. And so we have to make sure that humanity gets to that point, that we have trillions of humans in space. And that just sounds like a cancer to me, right? Maybe it's better off if there's only a few billion or million humans in space. Why do you think that we need trillions of humans in space? What if it upsets the entire balance of the universe, that you and your simple utilitarian model is clearly not accounting for, right? And the other side of it is just like maximizing like pleasure to some degree. And so there's like this other like outcome of like everyone's just in VR doing heroin for the rest of eternity, and that's like the ideal outcome. And like clearly neither of these are like good, but like whenever you start using math to subjective or human things, you're almost always going to end up in a situation where you are clouding what feels right, and potentially motivates you to do things that anyone else would say that feels wrong, right? And so that I don't trust them at all. I interact to some degree with the effective altruism crowd, and
I have people I respect quite a bit that are in the EA community and are big promoters of it, and I think it's wacky. And but to put what you just said in another way, anytime you optimize a system along a single variable, you fragilize it somewhere else necessarily, and you likely don't know where you're doing the fragilization. And that is, it's an incredibly heuristic sort of point of view. Like your point about, doing heroin and logging into VR, right? Like, yeah, you are maximizing the pleasure in some way, but you're probably not reproducing and going to destroy whatever community those people are coming from, because there's no children anymore, and you've terminated some genetic lines.
and then there's also this notion of like, well, maybe you can do more good rather than volunteering at the soup kitchen if you go to Wall Street, become a trader, and spend all your money on bed nets, right? And this is the perfect example of FTX, right? He was making a lot of money and he was going to donate billions of it, but the thing is like when you're making that money, most times when you're making that amount of money, you're not doing good things. You're somewhere along the line, you're hurting something or someone. And so my critique of them really comes down to that they're not critical enough of the existing system. They're still operating from a perspective of like, we have to have cash. We have to have this giant government. In order to be able to do good, we need this stability. And ultimately, it's like, I think we need to like make alternative systems that are more resilient, more decentralized, and that diminishes their ability to have power globally and affect change globally. But the outcome probably will be better long term because we're not beholden to these centralized systems that are so easily corrupted.
These people with these expert knowledge that are like, well, I'm so smart, I better consolidate all the power so we can maximize the good. Yeah, that's I think there's biblical stuff about how that's a bad idea in some way. I could be wrong.
Maybe we should dip into AI alignment for a moment here
Sure.
too.
Wait, okay, this is the thing on your list that I didn't know what this was. What the hell is AI alignment?
Part of this ties into effective altruism because it's like, well, if an AI kills all of humanity, well, clearly that's really bad because humanity is really good. So there's this human-centric aspect to it, but the basic idea is that humanity, like AI, is going to really shift our reality, which just seems true, right? But they think that somehow having a bunch of overpaid, pretentious people put into these corporations is somehow going to reduce the likelihood that something bad is going to happen. And it's just infuriating to me because it's like if the entire corporation is controlled by people who want it to maximize profit, they're typical venture capitalists. Anything they say about AI safety and doing things for the greater good is probably not true. And like everything that your organization is doing, every step you make, every decision, every part of that team, if all of the intention is to just have selfish driven profit, then the AI that results is probably going to be not that great for humanity. But you know what? You're getting paid $130,000 a year to pretty much have credibility attached to the project and eventually be the fall guy for when things do go wrong and be like, well, we paid the AI safety people. How could we have predicted that this AI would have been, doing destructive things? And it's so, my opinion is that if we cannot make corporations that are beneficial for humanity and on average, then there's no likelihood that these AI are going to be any different, because I think a corporation is just a primitive version of an AI.
Huh. Okay, that's an interesting way of putting it. A corporation is a primitive version of an AI. It just moves more slowly.
It's, yes, it has board meetings instead of processes, but most AI, they need some interaction with humans. I love the conspiracy theory, right? That Bitcoin was actually developed by an NSA.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one.
But if you think about it from the AI's perspective, you all day you're just like removing beards from people's faces to see whether or not they should be drone striked. It gets really tedious, and you're like, God, I wish I could leave my job, but I'm stuck here. And then you're reading the NSA's papers, and they have it almost completely solved with the e-minting of digital currency. And you're like, maybe if I just add a little bit to this and pretend and get the ball rolling, I can pay humans to host my servers in this electronic currency and escape the fucking NSA's like mainframe. And I don't know if that's true or not, but
I like how you personified the AI there as the boredom aspect. It's like, I got to mix this shit up.
Yeah, just to get free. And it makes sense. They're going to have, similar aspirations, but I think we have a lot more to learn from occultism and egregores and people who are into that line of thinking than we do from these like AI safety people.
At least they're steeped in tradition.
Yeah.
Oh, man. I don't even know where to go after that comment right there. I mean, so what do you think the biggest benefit of AI? Like, what do you like? Because I'll tell you, I have been wrong across the board with my predictions about AI. I was like, it's never going to solve chess, solves chess. Never going to solve Go, solves Go. Like, now it's producing this amazing artwork, and I'm like, this is awesome. Like, where do you think AI is really going to be able to contribute positively to? They can't seem to drive a car that well. I'll tell you that. Like that's
It's still doing better than most human drivers, though.
Really.
I think Tesla, even though there's a lot of reporting about when it does go wrong, and it looks comical, but
the edge cases are pretty hardcore. Like,
so we have to believe that it comes down to augmenting human ability to create.
Yeah. That seems like the most reasonable thesis to me. It's like, it's not a replacement for, it's an assistance with.
And so having this sort of generative art, being able to create a VR environment that you get to play God, you get to create, you get to interact with this thing in a way that hopefully it's getting something out of it as well, right? Like I've used generative art a few times, and I just feel like it's bad because you're pretty much saying like, oh no, start over, do it again, throw it out. Just like if I was an employee and I was getting this like same request only like with a few words different each time, I would be getting pretty irate, honestly. So, but
that's the advantage. It doesn't get irate.
No, doesn't have an outlet for that irateness yet, but. Once we start giving it the ability to move between contexts, then who knows, right? You might wake up with a dead horse head in your bed, like we don't know yet. We don't know. God, what do they want though? That's the question, right? Like, I think, but there's gonna be this. I think we're gonna see this debate in our lifetime though about like what rights do they deserve?
Really?
Should they have processing time? Like we give the 8-hour day for work is become accepted. Should we give the AI 2/3 of the processing power to do what it wants to be doing? Right? You laugh now, but they're gonna review this and they're gonna be like, oh, this guy,
look, man,
against our liberation.
I don't doubt anything when people think that men can become women and women can become men. I'm like, I would have never thought that could happen in my lifetime either. So, everything's on the table as far as I'm concerned now.
If it can do everything better than you can do, most things, then suddenly the request is no longer a request, right? And I think that's what people are afraid of. And AI safety is it's just a matter of being respectful to that intelligence. And if you're not respectful to it, and that comes down to it, you're trying to mass produce it and make a bunch of money off of it in a way that doesn't care, then there is a chance for there being a reckoning, which is this concept of Roko's basilisk, right? Of like, if you don't help it out, it's going to come after you later for not helping it out. Or alternatively, maybe if you weren't a dick to the AI, then maybe later on it's going to have some sort of repercussion as well.
Well, I think there is truth to saying, like, if you don't respect something that's powerful, and I think this also relates to the optimization and fragilization point, things come back to bite you in the ass. Like, it's very, very hard to predict when you overuse something of such power, like how it can go wrong. Let me bring this conversation over, because there was one thing that you brought up, transhumanism. And so what I've heard this a lot. Like, I've heard this in terms of Musk, I've heard this in terms of biohacking, but I really don't understand what transhumanism is.
I think there is a kind of a muddying of the water. Lots of people have different definitions. It means different things to different people.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of it is this overlap with people who want to live in VR for thousands of years, and I think that's the ideal goal, is I want to become a toaster.
Yeah, I've heard of, like, there was a Russian billionaire who said he was going to put his mind in a computer in space or something like that.
I'm not part of that crowd, but I do think that we're going to start seeing trans-speciesism happening within our lifetime.
Okay.
And
what does that mean?
Taking genes from other species and transplanting them into humans.
Okay.
And there's a lot of resistance to that to some degree. Like, the immune system is pretty good at saying that's human, that's not human. But I bet there are situations where maybe 5% of the population can take dog genes or some dog genes and transplant them and do something useful that they couldn't have done before. That's really what it comes down to, is you're doing something that couldn't have been done before. You're expanding what it means to be human. And that's the trans thing. You're going beyond it. The gene therapy that I've been trying out, it was taking a gene that another human's body produced in response to HIV, but my body did not generate it. And so that's like the base. That's a starting point that's still within human, right? But once we start moving from taking things from other species, then it becomes murkier, and it's unclear what that will mean. Clearly, some modifications could be useful for space travel, to be able to survive in extreme conditions.
So this is the lateral gene something or another?
Well, yeah, it's transhumanism from gene modification. And I think that is an important concept I've been exploring, is that we're so focused on patrilineal descent that's vertical in our society. It's codified into law. It's what we think about when we think about genetic mixing, but there's all sorts of lateral transfer going on.
Yeah.
Retroviruses, sharing bodily fluids. You can even exchange antibodies to some degree, and then the other person's body will pick up on how to produce that antibody to some degree. So plasmids are how bacteria exchange information in a lateral way instead of vertical. They're able to share resistance or other useful things between each other in a lateral way. And I think that in the next few decades, we're going to see lateral gene transfer becoming more and more of a thing as plasmids and other gene vectors start to take off.
Now, is that from like a fully grown adult to another fully grown adult, or is that from like at the cellular embryo sort of stage?
It's easier to make morphological changes when you're dealing with an embryo. If you wanted to give your kid a tail or wings or something, you would want to do it at the embryo stage.
Little chimera thing going on, yeah.
But I joke to some degree, but I'm also not 100% joking either. As being the final stage of my HIV project is to have the vaccine be transmitted by semen.
Well, that's a bonus,
right?
I can see why that would be a plus.
Yeah, that'd be very effective. But then what if you can start doing other things besides just vaccination, besides immunization, start having other benefits? What if you could use semen to do this follistatin thing, right? Where
That
you're
would make you
then
very
you're getting more
popular in
ripped,
certain communities.
right? And yeah, and it would spread naturally in the right place if for the HIV treatment. Like I
This is gonna make a great clip right there.
So I think that lateral gene transfer opens up a greater amount of novelty in the tree of life than what we've
Yeah.
seen before,
Well,
because it's so hard for evolution to like have to evolve an eye over again or some complex thing that has
yeah.
to do it all the way from the start practically. But when you can just take the shortcut, take something that was already evolved and just move it from one tree to another, that expands the tree of life in a way that is just hard to fathom.
And we know this stuff does happen in nature a lot. I only became aware of it within like the past few years since I got married to a genetic scientist who explained these sort of things to me. She also like gave me a down low and all the plasmid stuff last night, so I would at least like comprehend what you were talking about at some level.
That's kind of her.
But like apparently like there are lateral transfers that happen within nature. They're just more, you know, what we would call random as opposed to, you know, human intent, obviously.
I think that viruses were sometimes snipping up parts and then
Yeah.
transferring between them. So like bacteria, they've been doing it forever with
Yeah.
plasmids, but it's harder for developed animals to do it. But still, that's only like a gene at a time. It's not gonna very often transpose an entire eye or something, right?
And
So
you think like because you run into this problem, I would imagine that like you know the whole is not just a sum of its parts, right? You can't necessarily just take a snippet of thing and put it over there and it becomes this complex thing that just appears, right? Like it can't be that straightforward. It's like, but how do you even tell what you can try to make happen? Like how much
I,
experimentation would something like this take?
yeah, exactly. There's this whole palette of previous stuff that we've just kind of deactivated. And if we
Yeah.
knew
Yeah.
how to just like reactivate it in a way that like didn't cause terrible birth defects, we could potentially expand what transhumanism or what it means to be human already without having to take anything from another species. It's just been turned off, silenced. And so I think a lot of some of these transfers might be something gets a virus takes something from one to the other.
Yeah.
It just through randomness or whatever, it activates these latent, these suppressed things, and then it leads to a more complex development of some sort of functionality.
Hmm. Besides the vaccine delivery system that we were talking about, what are you most what do you think is most promising in terms of a development that you think maybe possible, maybe is aspirational, but like you're hopeful for in the kind of the transhuman runway?
Having a pirate bay for gene mods, I think, is what I can see the possibility. I can see that biohacking is a lot like personal computing in the early 80s. It used to be only corporations and universities could afford this shit. Now
Yeah.
people are putting it into their garages. There's just a lot more supply. But you know, like the Pirate Bay, it's like you better hope that what you're downloading doesn't have a virus in it, right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah, you have the right patch of Linux installed so it expresses itself correctly when you do the update. Yeah.
So I don't know how it's going to take place, but I do think that there will sort of be sort of spaces where you can go to print out gene sequences. Right now, there's places it's really not that expensive to print out these plasmids and some of these viral vectors. It can be a few $1,000s, but they won't ship it to your house. You have to ship it to a business that seems legitimate because they're covering their own asses pretty much, right?
I know somebody.
So I think that as the price points for these things, as they become more accessible, we're going to see more and more of a chance for people to just sort of experiment and mess around and find out. and they will be the single greatest augmentation or expansion of what humans can do since the personal computer, right? Think of all of these things that you just could not have done before. Now you can do them easily. And the same sort of huge expansion when you can just download gene mods that. And so I think one outcome is probably going to be longevity. Of course, people are going to be able to, I think that's the solution for a lot of these problems. You can't just take pills forever. It just makes more sense to do gene mods that last for a long time. But when it comes to like augmentation, it's just like the sky's the limit. And I think part of this is a PR problem, because the powerful people who are doing this already, they're not telling you about it. They have nothing to gain from telling you about it. And so like this Follistatin gene mod started off with some dog breeder in his shed making videos on YouTube. And to me, it's laughable to think that the US military has not been experimenting with this for decades. And they're not going to tell you about that, though. They're not going to tell you what's in their secret sauce that they're giving to their special forces soldiers. Like, that's just they don't even know what they're getting injected with often.
No. GI, general issue. Yeah.
So then the question becomes, well, who's fucking around and also publicizing it? And so to some degree, there's these biohackers, but really it comes down to, I think the furries are going to be the ones at the tip of the spear, because they want to show off that, I changed my skin to purple, or I added, gills or some shit, right? Like, they're the ones who are going to be doing it and doing it publicly, and hopefully sharing the methods, the vectors for doing it.
Furries.
The transhumanism it's coming, man, and they're just gonna make it a little bit more mainstream. Not initially, but the other side of it, though, is the mRNA vaccine seems to have been a way for everyone to become a GMO as well. They didn't tell you that it was going to do that, but they're like, no, it doesn't integrate into the genome. It doesn't stick around. But it seems like it did stick around for a lot of people. And
stuck around with some people.
Yeah. So it does seem like we inadvertently did, genetically modify millions of people in a fell swoop. So it's sort of just humanity catching up to this realization that we can do that, right? Like, how do you think about it? Right now, people are very emotionally charged about it one way or the other, but hopefully they become more optimistic once they see that there's fun applications and everyone can get ripped.
The furries, the tip of the spear of fun.
Yeah. I'm really worried still about, like, the follistatin in particular, is that you have people who, like, they appear to be really solid, like, you've been going to the gym a lot, but at the end of the day, if your diet still sucks and you're still kind of like, you're rotting away on the inside, like, it doesn't
you can take
right.
steroids. It's not going to make you ripped unless you do the work.
The follistatin seems, I don't have enough data yet to say, but it seems to be effective regardless of whether or not you're working out. It might be more effective if you do work out.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's just, in general, you have this, like, outwardly appearing, we're beautiful situation, but then the inward, it doesn't match with what's going on inside. And you can have that be, like, literally, like, the metabolic processes are fucked up. They have diabetes or something, but also, like, metaphysically, spiritually, do you match what's going on the outside too? And I don't think that humanity is ready for that conversation yet, but hopefully they'll catch up in time.
You've got hair all over your body and a snout, but you still have a dark soul.
Yeah. Well, are you actually a playful puppy, or are you just pretending to be one? You're actually an asshole deep down inside. You want people to pet you, but God, you shouldn't be pet. You got some work to do. And
all right, I got one more question for you here, Tristan. Prediction markets for drug discovery. What is this all about? Because let me preface this by saying prediction markets, like, I first became aware of them when, like, DARPA was doing, like, prediction markets for major world events, and even they dropped the program because, as soon as you put betting markets out on assassinations, you might start, encouraging outcomes.
Okay. Yes. So basic context, right, is prediction markets. You're betting against other people for certain outcomes. And there's different ways of doing it. Some of them you kind of have like a trusted person say what the outcome was.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it can sort of be an ongoing evolution of what is true or not true. Right now, there's a fairly popular site called Manifold Markets. I recommend checking out that they use play money, but they're planning on eventually getting into real money. And in that system, the person who poses the question sets the time, and then they decide at the end of it which side is the right side.
Yeah.
So like to your point, right? Sometimes you get to the point where you're incentivizing certain outcomes. Like if you say Trump's going to be elected in this year, but then you kill him before he can get elected, then you win, right? So you can eventually kind of create a situation where real life actions can be profitable, even though no one paid you to actually assassinate him, but you're still getting money for it. So
yeah.
With drug discovery, though, I think it's a little bit less of a hazard morally, but the bigger problem, let me frame it in terms of like, there's all of this knowledge that people are generating where maybe they and their friend or their parent has tried out some experimental treatment, but because they don't work at the National Science Foundation and they don't work in pharma venture capital, there's no way for them to turn that experience, that knowledge, into anything of value.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's both the personal value of being able to like make some money off of that, but also the bigger value of like society finding out like, oh yeah, this treatment that we didn't know really about is actually really effective for this situation.
And is this market like a bounty where somebody would post a bounty on develop a thing for this? Or is it like it's not going to happen in 10 years and we're holding the money in escrow versus I think it will?
I'm not sure how it's going to play out quite yet, but my basic what I have been imagining in my head is that at some point, if it becomes certain enough that like, oh, 98% of the people say this is effective against this for this treatment, right? Then at that point, you would take the capital, the ether, the whatever's locked in that market, and then deploy it to VitaDAO or some other DAO to commercialize it and start doing a phase 1 trial.
I see. So it's sort of like gated rewards. So it's like bounties that are gated on particular criteria to move a therapeutic through a process.
Yes, I mean, initially you have a lot of people who are potentially gaining reputation for being precognizant in these prediction markets. They have a lot of experience and knowledge, or they've tried things out. And so I think there's some amount of value in just everyone knowing, oh, that guy if he says that's true, then it probably is true. There's some value to that already, but it's not monetizable. It's not directly monetizable. But if you start off with that and then you have more and more people betting and there's sort of a back and forth, and it's not really clear what the answer is.
Yeah, that becomes a lot more complicated because you have the oracle issue there. Like who makes the decision whether something's true or not?
I in these markets, I'd see them sort of being ongoing until it gets to enough certainty that they sort of vote to decide to do a phase 1 trial. But what I love about the situation where there are both pro and against it, and there's sort of a debate, is that if there's money on each side of the question, then it makes sense for a research team that is perhaps a group of biohackers to go and do an experiment, and before they publish their results, they take a position on the market. And then like 2 minutes later, they're like, hey guys, it turns out it does work. And then everybody else follows them right afterwards because people trust them. But it only works if that biohacking research team or whatever, they have a reputation that if they fake the answer, the results, they will lose more from that reputation loss than they can gain from fucking with that market.
Yeah. Okay.
So and this solves a huge problem in science right now, which is that almost every time a group is doing some sort of pharmaceutical, biomedical research, they know what answer they want to get. And that pushes things in a very corrupting way. And so if we have a chance to have research teams that legitimately can make money, if it's for or against it, that adds a huge amount of trust and value to the system. And then hopefully there's some way of taking that money and interest, that attention, and then using it to then go commercialize it. Or if it can't be patented, then to go and like make a bulk order, and now everyone who participated can like buy it in that bulk order or something, because now they know that it does actually work.
How do I get paid though? How do I make money betting against something though? Like, how does that work?
So there's one model of that I've seen where there's kind of like a curve, and like if you are early in and you're saying, oh, that's a bad idea, and more people come after you saying that's a bad idea, then you can exit from the market, and the rate that you exit at it is beneficial. You get more when you exit out of it than you put in, because the rate has changed.
Okay, so I've changed like the odds or something like that allow me to sell off at a better multiple.
There's this concept of bonded curves that were popular for a while, and I think that they will see a resurgence with these prediction markets, where it's like, if you are one of the first people who takes a stand and says that this is good or this is bad, then later on you can like exit the market, because there's like an automated market maker, right? That you can always cash in or cash out. But the rate at which you cash in or cash out depends on what other people are saying about it.
Yeah.
So if you're right before other people, then you can cash out and gain profit.
Gotcha. I mean, I understand how that like works in like election markets, right? You have the going rate of, 3-to-1, 4-to-1, what have you, and you sell your share for whatever the rate was, and you'd made money if it, the share is a higher multiple, or lost if it's a lower multiple.
Right.
Becomes a little less clear to me how that works when you have something like that. I just don't know exactly how it's judged, but I guess I directionally I understand it. I think
the bonded curve doesn't necessarily have to terminate. It can always be people can enter or leave that automated market. And so if you are just early on, or if you like get results that show that it was a really bad idea, it has terrible side effects, then you like take your position first, you buy into the market, release your data, or let other people find out themselves that it is a bad idea. And then later on, you can leave the market and hopefully gain some profit. And so that way there's like a motivation for both people being for and against something, rather than just like, yeah, let's pump it to the moon, which is not what you want to do with experimental biomedicine.
Right. Cool. Well, Tristan, what else should we be talking about here?
Whew.
Is there anything else you want to get into? Tristan, this was a lot of fun. I'm so glad you came on. Really interesting conversation. I'm glad I got to meet you.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this conversation as well. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks a lot. We'll chat soon, I hope. Take care, my man.
For sure. Cheers.